Hi, and welcome to CMO Journeys, where we sit down with the marketing leaders shaping some of today's most innovative brands. I'm Christian Banach, and I explore the stories behind CMOs, how they lead, how they grow, and how they think about partnering with agencies. Vertex Service Partners is building a national platform of residential exterior brands, primarily roofing, with a shared services model designed to help local operators scale faster and smarter. Today, I'm joined by Josh Churnick, Chief Marketing Officer at Vertex Service Partners, whose background spans early digital community building, consumer brands, and multiple high-growth services businesses. Josh, welcome to CMO Journeys.
Yeah, thank you. Happy to be here.
Excellent. So you have described your career as eclectic until you found your stride in home services. What was it about that chapter that really clicked for you in a way that maybe the earlier ones didn't?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think, as with any marketer, it's not always easy to find your niche. And so I was trying a lot of different industries, a lot of different verticals, kind of dancing around a general marketing theme. But when I hit home services, it kind of resonated a little bit deeper than some of my past roles. And what I think ultimately that I liked about it is, marketing is generally a art and a science. But not all marketing roles fit neatly 50-50 in that. So I worked for great organizations, honestly, that had maybe more of a subjective feel when you're looking at results. Sometimes it came down to the CEO either liking the content that you were creating or the strategy that you had put in place. And with home services, what I kind of dug was that, what you actually come up with can be then seen in black and white. So you get that instant kind of consumer feedback and a very clear attribution trail if you set it up correctly. So that path really shows what your results look like rather than it being subjective. And that's, I think, what I kind of like about it.
Sure. Yeah, I can see that. My brain definitely is very numbers driven, so I can see how that would be gratifying to actually be able to measure those results in a more concrete way. Let's go back a little bit now.
Sure.
You built and sold a digital music platform before really social media was much of a thing.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear more about that and really what did that experience teach you about audience building that is showing up to how you think today?
Yeah, I mean, that was like right out of high school. I worked on a site that it was called localmusicscenes.com, and it was a platform for independent artists to this was before I'm very old, before MySpace, before Facebook, got any of that stuff. Allowed them to put up a profile, mark their music dates on a calendar. I mean, for the time, it sounds kind of silly talking about it now because we have so much more functionality online, but at the time it was pretty revolutionary. And then we partnered with Billboard magazine. So the idea behind that was they were opening nightclubs, performance venues, really, kind of like a House of Blues. But what they wanted to do was feature independent artists, and there was no central place to really get all that information or to understand which artists were big in a particular geographic area. So having that kind of database was really helpful. So we were trying to integrate that into the live performance venues, and I opened two of them, one in Sunset, one on Sunset Strip in LA, and one in South Beach, Miami. Shortly after the Miami club opened, it was September 11th, and kind of all hell broke loose. So that didn't actually come to fruition. The dream was cut short, if you will. But working on that, really a media company was a really interesting kind of foray into marketing because it's a very different place than where I am now. But a fun one. I kind of peaked early as far as cool factor, and then I don't know how I ended up in roofing from the music industry, but we can go through that journey a little bit.
Yeah. Love to poke on that maybe a little bit later on.
Yeah.
So you look at your move from entertainment and CPG into more just operational, very, as you described, kind of more performance heavy categories like insurance and home services. What has changed though for you in how you define great marketing?
Well, again, I think great marketing is really ultimately communicating value to a consumer. And whether it's a creative campaign based on, uh, promotion in a restaurant group, which I've done, or, leads driven to a company like home services, it's really kind of your end goal. And how, any strategy from a marketing standpoint should be focused on your goals for your organization. But at the end of the day, finding that resonance between your goals and what the consumer is looking for as far as solving a pain point, seeing the value, that's really what success looks like. So any way you kind of slice or dice those results, that's ultimately your goal.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense. So when you kind of blended creative environments now with more metrics driven ones, as we've been talking about here, how has that also now maybe shaped how you lead?
How I lead my teams and
Yeah.
the companies I organize with. Again, it's a good question because creative is always a little subjective. But again, it's really kind of the reaction of the consumer. You can kind of see, you could launch two identical campaigns in the same geo. But if the creative is just a slight difference, you can kind of see the impact of that a lot of the time. And really, I think what you're doing is you're matching the want or need of the consumer with the want of the goals of your campaign for the organization that you're marketing. So, it's really kind of core KPIs and the way that the consumer's reacting. If they're picking it up, if I always tell my team this, I'm like, if they're picking up what you're throwing down, then that's ultimately what we're after.
Yeah. I love that. So thinking back on your career to date, is there maybe a piece of advice, could be from a mentor, an investor, or even a book maybe you've read, that still influences how you're making decisions here today?
Sure. Yeah, I've got a lot of great people that I've worked with, a lot of great information passed on through experience with other great leaders. Um, I think I think every marketer struggles with this a little bit, especially earlier on. Um, when we're talking about creative and kind of um, looking at the results of that, one of the things that a mentor told me is, don't worry about what you like, worry about what works. And I think that's really telling because a lot of brands can get caught up in their image that they want to portray or, the message that they're trying to communicate. But at the end of the day, the consumer and what they feel about your brand is really what matters. So I always try to keep that in mind. Like, I don't know if I like how that sounds, right? But if the consumer is going to react well to it and it's kind of speak to them, that's ultimately what we're trying to accomplish. So sometimes you have to take your personal feelings out of it and really cater to your customer.
Yeah, I love that. I feel like in my career, I've oftentimes been the target audience also of the company, which I think is a little bit of a blessing and a curse. I think it does give me some insight well into the persona, but I also bring my own biases right into it. And I'm not a total representative sample of the target audience. So that's great reminder of that, whether you are or you're not, part of that demo. So great. So I'd love to shift gears now, now that we kind of have an idea of your background, and talk about some of the work you're doing today. You stepped into Vertex with a platform that's really already home to dozens of brands and growing. When you first looked at this opportunity, what did you see that maybe others had missed?
I don't know if there's anything that others had missed. I think that when you're part of an organization that's growing quickly, sometimes it's difficult for those in the organization to take a step back and look at it from an external view. So I think I was kind of, you know, I was given the opportunity to do that, which when you're running at 1,000,000 miles per hour, very difficult to be like, wait a minute, like, is the big picture really coming into fruition here, or is there something missing? So when I came here, I've just started. I'm only not even 90 days in. I think that the most apparent thing was that they have collected a number of regional brands that are all great, have phenomenal reputations in the market, and operate well for their customers, have great Google reviews, all that kind of stuff. But I think what they were kind of missing, and part of the reason why I joined, was there's a huge opportunity to treat this more as an enterprise organization rather than a collection of small brands. That's kind of the service. That's kind of the Vertex Service Partners mentality. Bring all these smaller companies together into more of an aggregate kind of pool, and then add in value. And so they kind of were missing the mark there. Again, I think it's just they were acquiring companies and building greenfield markets and just going a million miles an hour. So I think that they kind of lost sight of that grand vision at some point. Needed some help kind of building that out. So that's been my focus in the early stages of joining the team.
Sure. So what's done different about marketing at that more platform level versus at like maybe a single brand level?
Yeah, it's the level of complexity and really being diligent about your data hygiene, I guess, for lack of a better term. I mean, it's a lot of information from a lot of different sources, and so it's very difficult to wrap your hands around what's going on as a whole, or even in those individual places if the data isn't there. And so, one of the first initiatives that I have is reformatting how that reporting looks and keeping all the metrics in a more digestible format. Because again, we have 27 brands total, so that's just a lot of information. You can't look at them individually and understand where the general sense of success or failure is. So, we're working on putting together some BI boards and dashboards and that kind of thing to kind of measure how everything is doing as a whole, and then kind of going through and picking out the red flags and addressing those to kind of get results along the way.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, you kind of build the baseline of where you're at in the first place to kind of understand where you need to go next with it.
Yeah, it's always fun when you join a new organization as a new CMO because they want instant results, and I'm all like, nope, infrastructure is kind of the focus, and they're like, we want EBITDA right now. And while I understand that, and the pace is quick, I think that this is probably a good piece of advice, which is the only reason I'm kind of interrupting you, is because organizations really have to pay attention to their marketing infrastructure. Because if you don't do that, you're going to be making bad decisions based on bad data, especially in the home services world. So, taking that little extra amount of time, even though you might not love it, it's going to pay off dividends in the future.
Yeah. So you mentioned that as a capability. It sounds like you're making some investments on. What are maybe some other areas you're looking to make investments with?
It's really more organizational than anything else. I mean, one of the key things, especially when you're dealing with a multi-brand kind of organization like this, is we're trying to consolidate and again wrap your hands around more powerful tools. So one of the good examples would be direct mail, just picking a channel at random here, but across all of the regional brands that we have, we were using, I think, 5 or 6 vendors, and so there's a lot of downside to that. Yes, you're maybe catering to the individual regions that you're in, and they can pay special close attention to that. But at the same time, you're not leveraging your buying power, so you're paying more for the services and data that you're using. You're not learning from a bigger pool of data. It's all fragmented. Most programs now, whether they be digital or analog, any real market campaign is based on taking the data that you have and kind of optimizing off of that. But if you have 5 different sources of data, it's infinitely more complicated to do that. So finding ways to make everything more efficient, I guess, is really the core of what we're doing right now. And of course, I'm new, so it's going to be a little difficult to kind of go off of anything long term, but that's what we're doing in it for.
Sure. What does your then internal team look like, and where maybe are you leaning on them, and where maybe are you leaning on outside partners?
Yeah, it's a lot of complexity, so you kind of need a lot of hands on deck. We have regional marketing leaders who are great. I came on with the luxury of having people that are experienced with the individual brands in their region and understand kind of idiosyncratic details that have to be paid attention to. And they kind of, you know, for lack of a better term, own those brands, or they've been nurturing them for the time that they've been working with them. So it's great. There's a little bit of um, help in there depending on the size of the region. And since we're still growing as an organization, that'll probably continue. But we leverage a lot of outside help as well. Again, we're trying to be as efficient as possible. So you kind of have to have somebody with intimate knowledge of that region and of those brands, but then you also need a little bit of horsepower to get some of these things off the ground and get better results, kind of optimize as you go. So it's kind of balancing that. And when we lean on those third parties, it's also really important that we have quality partners and not, experimenting all over the place. Like, kind of want to hone in on where you're seeing the most success and kind of go from.
Yeah, that makes sense. And maybe this is exactly what you just had said, but I'm curious, you're stepping into this role. What's maybe taking up more of your attention now than you had expected when you initially started?
Yeah, it's the timeline that the systems and processes take to kind of get built and organized.
Yeah.
When you have an organization that's used to looking at each individual brand versus the collective, there's a lot of infrastructure that has to be built. And it was not built when I got here, so we're kind of putting that together. Our contact centers are another example. They were independently throughout the country. We're trying to consolidate a little bit, but what we're really trying to do is consolidate the processes and make sure everybody's kind of operating the same way. It does me no good to evaluate all these different locations. We kind of have to see what's working and what's not in a more cumulative way, so we can make kind of overall process changes that'll drive the business forward.
Yeah, that makes sense. So you mentioned the contact centers.
Mm-hmm.
How tightly do you believe marketing should own or influence that conversion downstream?
You can add all the lead flow you want into the funnel, but if you don't have a strong conversion engine that understands kind of how to convey the value of consultation to a consumer, it's not going to do you any good, because that's, again, your KPI. That's the end result that you're trying to hit. So if you can't rely on that, it doesn't really matter what you do up funnel, because down funnel is going to have a logjam. I would say that marketing has to be intimately involved in call center operations, not only to drive performance, but to get insights. They talk to your customer every single day. Every appointment your sales team is going to go out on has passed through one of your call center agents. They have a phenomenal amount of insight into what's happening. And if you don't pay attention to that, it's only to your detriment. It's only going to help you to kind of understand that contextual information that you can't get from a spreadsheet or from sales numbers.
Yeah. You mentioned the funnel, and in a market where home improvement growth is and moderating and acquisition costs are rising, how are you thinking about efficiency versus the brand investments?
So you mean performance versus brand marketing?
Yeah.
It's always kind of an interesting balance between those two. So I think that a lot of companies will make some errors in judgment there. And it depends on the vertical. It's really heavily dependent on what vertical you're in. So trust with the consumer is paramount. When you're looking for sales results, if the consumer doesn't trust your brand or the people within it, then you're going to have a really tough time. So investing in nurturing your brand is crucial. But that's not to say that you just want to put up a million billboards. That's not going to necessarily, instill trust either. You still have to have performance, and you want to make sure that you have those consumers that get through the performance channels share their experience online, and provide that social proof of 5-star reviews and that kind of thing. And referrals are a huge portion of that. So it's really kind of a balancing act. I would say that if you have a new market or a new brand, you're going to have to invest in that brand heavily. Whereas if you have more established brands, you can kind of focus more on the performance. So it's always a mix. But managing that, or being the steward of that kind of division of effort is really kind of important. You have to
Yeah.
kind of understand it as you see the business moving forward.
Sure, sure. So, kind of speaking around on budgets, how, if any, have the broader economic or geopolitical shifts influenced some of the marketing investments that you have made to this point and are planning to make throughout the course of the year?
Yeah, I mean, it's a little early for me to tell you like definitively how that's working because at the
Yeah.
landscape, especially with the political landscape and the macroeconomic components of that are ever shifting. So we're again focusing more on the infrastructure side. But that's not to say that it isn't something we're paying attention to. I think that you have to look at intent of the homeowner. That's really kind of crucial. So with any home improvement company, if somebody's building a lot of equity in their home and they feel as though an investment is worthwhile, you're going to have an easier time. If everybody is broke, their house is losing money, they're not going to dump more money into that home. That's kind of the natural kind of flow of it. I think that you also have to take seasonal changes into account. So when you're looking at your percentage of brand versus performance, you have to kind of look at where their eyeballs are. So if you have less intent and you have consumers doing less searching for a solution that they're not necessarily looking for, then you have to maybe go into the more interruptive intent channels like social or something along those lines to where you're bringing it up as an option instead of just collecting, capturing the intent that's already there.
Yeah, makes sense. So, as you know, there's a lot of agencies that listen to us here, and I know in our conversation that we had a couple weeks ago in preparing for this, you had mentioned to me that you believe there's often a lack of transparency from the client side in agency relationships, and would love to hear more about that and what that looks like in practice.
Yeah, that's a really, I don't know if it's a hot take so much, but a lot of companies, and this doesn't just happen in home improvement, this is really everywhere. As a marketing leader, sometimes what you get caught up in is, you're like, I didn't get great results with this agency, so I'm just going to switch agencies. But I think that it bears mentioning that you need to kind of be a good partner to that agency for them to be successful too. Agencies or third parties are generally extensions of your marketing efforts. So were you giving them the data or the feedback that they needed to optimize? That's the number one thing that I see, especially in home improvement. They won't share disposition data. So they're feeding you leads sometimes, but you don't tell them what actually happened with those leads. So how are they going to know how to make changes to get better results? A lot of people kind of step back. They say, listen, I'm paying you a lot of money to be an agency partner or a third party to whatever kind of function. But you have to be an active participant in that partnership, and you have to provide as much transparency as you can. I'm not saying that you have to share customer data or do anything illegal. Nobody's talking about anything like that, but you want to share general KPIs and share and strategize with that agency. There's no agency on earth that knows your business as well as you do. And so sharing that and collaborating is really how you're going to get the best results. And
Yeah.
I think a lot of times people lose sight of that.
Yeah. I know we've certainly ran across clients in that same boat, and it's hard. I think it's good for those that have maybe sat on both sides of the fence, and I think they tend to understand that better. But at the end of the day, it's a partnership, and sometimes we kind of lose sight of that. So I love that. So when you are evaluating partners for a platform like Vertex, what are some of the signals that tell you that they understand home services versus maybe just saying that they do?
Yeah, well, that's the nice thing about home services is there's very clear attribution channels to measure that stuff. So you have KPIs and down funnel metrics that kind of show you what your performance looked like. There really isn't much of a difference there. A lot of agencies will say, they know home services, but then they won't have that many home services clients, or they haven't had any that really stuck for a long period of time. That's usually your first warning. But going into that, I mean, again, it's it's not subjective, where a lot of companies can kind of mask their experience or kind of tout it as bigger than it is because it's all just based off of your opinion, right? So they'll try to placate and show the marketing team kind of what they want to see as far as vanity metrics. But in home improvement, it's like, I see what the revenue looks like. I see how these leads are performing. I know what the response rate is. There's really nothing you can tell me that's going to say that you know what you're doing if these aren't working. But again, being transparent about that and sharing the data and giving them insight, I mean, they can only benefit from that. And if they benefit from it, you do. So
Yeah.
that's kind of how it works.
Sure. So how important is, say, specialization versus just full service capability? Where do you sit on that?
I think that it's a balance that you have to hit. I think that, I've benefited. You talk about my early career. I worked for insurance companies and restaurant groups and candy manufacturers. And, I learned a little bit from every one of those positions that I now bring to the home services realm. If you have an agency or a third party, they've only ever worked in home services, they're lacking a little perspective. But they're also, it could be the other way around. If they've been all over the place, they don't know the difference between a good campaign for home services and, another industry or vertical. So I think you kind of have to have a healthy dose of both, to be honest. And everybody got to get their feet wet in the industry to have some basic understanding of those down funnel metrics. I spoke to an agency the other day, huge agency, does phenomenal amount of business and very, very great, very, I would say, astonishingly good creative. But again, if they don't understand home services, then it may or may not hit, and you're taking a gamble. So I would take an organization that has a little bit of both, varied experience, but then also some direct experience.
Yeah, yeah. Is there, I don't know if you can quantify this at all, but would you be looking for that they've worked with just one in the space, they've worked with 5 in the space? Like, do you have a number that would kind of perk your ears, or maybe the opposite, turn you off?
I don't know that it's a number necessarily. I think you have to look at the individual kind of situation. So, if an agency, let's say Renewal by Anderson, it's one of the largest home improvement companies in the country, window replacement. Everybody, after I said that, should probably recognize either Anderson or Renewal by Anderson. I worked there for quite some time and know the power of that brand. If I met an agency and they only worked with Renewal by Anderson, they're still going to have a lot of experience because they're working with a huge client. But if they work for just a couple smaller individuals, they might not know how to work with a larger scale home services company. So I think it really is dependent on the situation.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. So I think we've made it to this point without mentioning AI, but I have to ask, where do you believe AI will maybe replace agencies, and maybe where it won't?
Yeah, the topic du jour of AI. Listen, I think that AI holds. I'm going to give you a fairly generic answer, but then kind of explain why. I think AI obviously holds a ton of opportunity. It's a topic that everybody's kind of grappling with because it's accelerating at such a fast pace. I mean, I've seen some videos online that are indistinguishable from reality, and I know that the computing power behind AI and these agentic models can almost think on their own or appear to take action on their own, which is great. I think it still needs to be looked at as any kind of effort behind a brand. It has to be channeled correctly. And I don't know that AI is really at that point yet. We might get there soon, maybe sooner than a lot of us would like. I think that it's definitely a tool in the arsenal and becoming an ever more important tool, but will it completely erase the need for human guidance and judgment? No, because at the end of the day, you're still marketing to people, and people should probably understand how to guide that vision. The tools, however, crazy impressive. We might get to the point where humans are all, irrelevant. I'm just sitting on a beach looking at the spreadsheet, but I don't think that we're anytime soon gonna see that.
Yeah, yeah. No, I agree with that. Great tool. A lot of learning, a lot of question marks, but
Well, it's ever
I don't.
changing too. It's like the fastest moving target in human history from a from a production standpoint. So I don't know that anybody really has their handle on it, and as soon as they think they do, it's going to change. So I think that all we can do is really make the best decisions about where we employ these tools, but still understand that there's guidance that comes from the people that are running these organizations and employing those tools.
Yeah, yeah. No, I love that. So we're like to wrap things up here a bit. I got one other question that I
Sure.
would love to ask you here, because you had joked about peaking early in the music industry, and looking back now, how do you personally define success differently than you did in your 20s? How do you do it now versus what you did in your 20s?
Yeah, I think I was in the classic trap of thinking that the brand I worked on had kind of the perception of myself as a marketer. So, if you're I was working in the music industry, and I was like, oh, this is a sexy industry to be in. And then somehow down the line, I went to funeral prearrangement insurance, and then back to consumer packaged goods for Dr. Pepper, and then went to a rest. Like I just you conflate kind of what you're working on as part of the identity or the success criteria for what you're doing. I don't necessarily think that now. Now I look at the organization that I'm a part of. Am I helping those people achieve their goals? And that's really where the value lies. So take Vertex, for example. I say 27 brands, right? There's so many people that are involved downstream from where marketing starts at the top of the funnel. So you have all the salespeople that you're feeding appointments to. You have all your contact center people who are making a living answering these phone calls and setting up those appointments. You have infinite number of production people and installers, and all of these people are dependent on the success or failure of marketing campaigns to get people kind of in that sales funnel. So I no longer equate value to the brand. Otherwise, when I hit that funeral insurance, you would have tanked, right? It's more important to look at how you're influencing the lives of all of these people. If I'm successful, that means everybody that touches that roofing project along the way is also being successful, and I take a lot of responsibility for that. Also a little pressure, but my success is the success of the rest of the people in that organization that I work for, and I take a lot of pride in that, and that's kind of how I look at it now. Wouldn't have given you the same answer when I was in my 20s. I would have been like, I'm a rock star. Like, that's kind of the difference in priorities, I think. Maybe a little
Sure.
maturity, if I could be so bold as to say I have any maturity whatsoever.
I love that. I think it's a great way to close it out. Some great advice. So Josh, thanks again for this conversation and the insights. And to everybody watching, don't forget to follow CMO Journeys for more conversations with the marketing leaders that are shaping what's next. I'm Christian Banach. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you on the next episode.